During Thanksgiving dinner, Dad said, "Not everyone at this table deserves to be here." Everyone laughed and looked at me. I smiled and said, "Good thing I built a life that doesn't need your approval." "Don't worry, you'll read about it soon." 6 years. That's how long it had been since I stepped foot in my childhood home for Thanksgiving. Omaha was a time capsule, preserving every detail. The familiar cream siding, the cloying scent of turkey and furniture polish, the low thrum of a football game echoing somewhere unseen. Inside, the dining room shimmered with a forced amber glow, as if desperately trying to conjure the warmth of a family it no longer possessed. My father, Frank Bennett, presided at the head of the table, his whiskey glass already a casualty, his smile a practiced blade. He'd spent a lifetime fixing engines and people in the same way, by tightening what he didn't understand. My mother, Margaret, fussed over the cranberry sauce, a silent plea in her every movement, pretending not to notice the tension that hung heavy, a forgotten ghost. My brother, Cole, launched into another anecdote about his new truck, and everyone's laughter rose to meet him. Everyone but me. Then, my father's voice, a booming crescendo over the clatter of forks. "Not everyone at this table deserves to be here," he declared. The laughter that followed was instant, too loud, too familiar, and every head pivoted towards me. The overeducated daughter who had dared to leave, the one whose very existence made them uncomfortable. I didn't flinch. My gaze met his, steady and unyielding. "Good thing I built a life that doesn't need your approval," I replied, my voice a quiet steel. "Don't worry, you'll read about it soon." The room plunged into an abyss of silence. My mother froze, fork suspended midair. My father's grin flickered, just for a second. The old wall clock, a forgotten sentinel, ticked louder than it had any right to, marking the exact moment everything changed. Have you ever felt that profound sting, that shrinking sensation delivered by the very people meant to uplift you? That's where my story truly begins, a journey from feeling invisibly small to building a world where I could finally breathe. Tell me, where are you watching from? What truths resonate with you across the distance? I grew up in a house steeped in the aroma of motor oil and Sunday dinners. Warm, noisy, and bound by unspoken rules everyone understood. My father, Frank Bennett, a man who believed the world was forged by hands, not minds, ran a small auto shop on the edge of Omaha. He repaired everything from pickup trucks to lawnmowers, clad daily in the same Navy coveralls, like armor against a world he didn't quite trust. To him, success was the glint of sweat on a forehead, the stain of grease under nails. Books, computers, abstract ideas? They didn't count. They were for those who shied away from honest work. When I was little, I'd perch on the cold concrete floor of his shop, legs swinging, captivated. I loved the metallic tang of machines, the shower of sparks, the almost magical way he could resurrect something broken with just a wrench and a well-placed curse. But alongside that fascination, I cherished the whirring gears in my own head, the relentless curiosity that demanded to know why things worked, not just how. I craved to dismantle, to trace circuits, to grasp the invisible patterns that orchestrated movement. He called it overthinking. My mother, Margaret, glided through our days like a quiet melody. Gentle, patient, she was a master of diffusing tension before it could harden into conflict. Whenever Dad's temper flared, usually directed at me for messing with junk again or forgetting my place, she'd murmur, "He means well, Liv. You know how he is." It became a lullaby of excuses, wrapping me in a smothering comfort that simultaneously shut me down. Then there was Cole, my older brother, the golden child, quarterback, captain of everything, the source of Dad's puffed-up pride at every Friday night game. His trophies commanded an entire wall in our living room. The pride of the Bennetts, everyone would say, and Dad never corrected them. He didn't have to. The silence that followed spoke volumes. Cole was what I should have been. I wasn't jealous, not exactly. I just yearned to be seen, truly seen, for what I could do. While Cole practiced throws in the backyard, I was a scavenger in the junkyard behind our house, collecting old radios, broken speakers, discarded circuit boards. Hours vanished in the garage after school, me cross-legged on the floor, a screwdriver in one hand, a flashlight clamped between my teeth. Lacking funds for new parts, I mastered the art of coaxing old ones back to life. When, at 12, I repaired a busted transistor radio, the static fuzzed into music, a song for the 80s, and I nearly wept. That hum of revived static felt like the first sound of belonging. Dad saw it differently. He'd stride in, sniff the solder, and grumble, "You're wasting electricity." When I tried to show him my triumphs, he'd shake his head. "That's not real work, Liv. You can't feed yourself with that." Then, he'd ruffle Cole's hair and declare, "Now, there's a kid who knows how to build something real." The first deep crack between us appeared when I was 15. I'd poured weeks into building a small, wind-powered generator from scrap for the state science fair, soldering wires until my fingertips burned. When I won first place, the judges shook my hand, their praise like a warm embrace. Brilliant. I floated home, clutching the ribbon, my heart thrumming with pride. Dad was in his recliner, absorbed by the news. When I told him, he didn't even glance up. "That's nice," he said. "But don't brag about it, Liv. You'll make your brother feel bad." Something in me shattered then. Not audibly, but deep enough to echo for years. I remember walking to my room, shutting the door, and holding that ribbon in my lap until its meaning bled away. That was the night I understood. Love in our house came with conditions. It was a currency earned by embodying the person he understood, and I simply wasn't. After that, silence became our family's mother tongue. We didn't yell, we simply stopped talking. Dad ceased asking about my grades. I stopped volunteering them. Cole's football trophies multiplied, their golden figures frozen mid-victory, while my own experiments remained hidden beneath my bed. Mom still offered her soft, nervous smile, a valiant attempt to hold everything together, but her words only deepened the chasm. "He's proud of you, in his own way," she'd whisper when I helped with dinner. "He just doesn't know how to say it." But pride shouldn't require translation. Love shouldn't sound like an apology. The older I grew, the more I felt like a stranger in my own home, a quiet shadow in a house that orbited its men. I mastered the art of vanishing in conversations, of biting my tongue before too many questions could be mistaken for defiance. But every night, when the house fell still and the crickets reclaimed their chorus, I'd slip back into the garage with a flashlight and my pile of broken machines. There, beneath the low hum of the fluorescent bulb, I felt unbound. That garage became my sanctuary, the sole place in the world where my hands could move without judgment, where the hiss of solder against metal drowned out the words I'd ceased to speak. I didn't grasp it then, but every screw I tightened, every spark I coaxed back to life, was my way of building something my father could never dismantle. The garage wasn't much. A concrete box with rusted shelves, a cracked window, a single yellow bulb that flickered as if debating its own existence. In winter, the cold gnawed through my sleeves, and my breath plumed into clouds that hung before dissolving. Yet that space, reeking of motor oil and dust, felt more like home than any room inside the house ever did. The floor was a chaotic tapestry of screws, old radios, and forgotten things, all cherished by me. It was my chaos. I built my first circuit board there at 16. It was imperfect, soldered, joints uneven, wires askew. But when I flipped the switch and a tiny red light pulsed to life, I felt a sensation I hadn't known in years: control. For once, the world responded to me. I didn't need permission or approval. I could forge something from nothing and make it obey. That yellow bulb became my sun, the hum of the power supply my heartbeat. One night, sifting through a forgotten box of tools, I discovered my grandfather's pocket watch. Its glass was shattered, the minute hand frozen at 12:47. Dad had kept it in a drawer, dismissing it as junk from another time. But as I held it, its weight felt like a story still yearning to unfold. I carried it to my workbench, pried open its case, and stared at the delicate, precise, stubborn gears within. Hours dissolved as I hunched over it with tweezers and a magnifying glass, refusing to surrender, even as my hands cramped and my eyes burned. By dawn, when I finally adjusted the last spring and turned the tiny crown. The second hand trembled, then began to tick, a soft, steady rhythm, fragile but vibrantly alive. I remember a quiet laugh escaping me, echoing in the cold air. That broken watch, discarded in a drawer, was beating again. It was the first thing I ever fully brought back to life. I wore it on a chain around my neck for weeks. It didn't complement anything I owned, but I didn't care. Every tick reminded me I could propel something forward, even when everything around me remained static. That night, sitting on the cold concrete floor, the pocket watch resting in my palm, I whispered a promise. If I can't make them proud, I'll make time itself listen. The words were small, almost a prayer. The next day, Dad passed the garage and saw me working. He shook his head. "Still playing with your toys, Liv?" he said. I longed to tell him I'd mended something he'd discarded, made it tick anew, but I didn't. I just offered a faint smile and replied, "Yeah, just playing," because I knew he wouldn't hear it anyway. He didn't speak the language of quiet miracles. After that, the garage became my universe. Every night after dinner, I'd sneak out with a thermos of cocoa and work under that yellow light until my fingers grew numb. The air would buzz faintly from the old power outlet, and sometimes when exhaustion blurred the edges of reality, I'd imagine the machines whispering back to me. "Keep going," they seemed to murmur. "You're close, Liv." I filled notebooks with sketches of inventions. Tiny engines, robotic arms, sensors that moved autonomously. None of them looked like much to an outsider, but to me, they were irrefutable proof that I could dream without permission. Each page was a rebellion against smallness. Sometimes, when the wind was strong, I could hear the faint roar from the high school stadium across town, the crowd cheering for Cole's team. The noise came in sharp, distant waves, and it used to make me feel utterly invisible. But as the watch ticked in my pocket and my soldering iron glowed, I understood I didn't need to be in that stadium to matter. My victories were smaller, quieter, but they were unequivocally mine. I remember one night, standing at the garage door, gazing at the frozen yard, the lights from the house flickering behind the curtains. Everyone inside was laughing, probably about Cole's latest touchdown, perhaps even about me. I smiled anyway, a blend of sadness and fierce pride. Then I whispered to the dark, "One day I'll build something that moves the world, even if they never see it." The words didn't echo, but they didn't need to. The garage heard me. The machines heard me. And so did time. The watch in my palm ticked on, slow and steady, as if in agreement. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, nestled between a stack of bills and a hardware store catalog. I almost missed it. The envelope, thin and white, bore the distinguished blue seal of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I couldn't open it immediately. My hands trembled too violently. For a moment, I just stood in the kitchen, staring, the faint tick of my grandfather's pocket watch in my jacket pocket, a persistent heartbeat urging me to breathe. When I finally tore it open, the words blurred before making sense. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been awarded a partial scholarship to MIT. I read it again and again, whispering the words aloud just to confirm their reality. A partial scholarship. I had done it. I raced outside to the garage, letter clutched in hand, as if it were the tangible proof of everything I'd tried to articulate my entire life. Dad was out front, leaning against his truck, oil on his hands, the radio humming old country songs. "Dad," I gasped, breathless. "I got an MIT, on a full scholarship." He didn't even look up at first. "MIT," he echoed, wiping his hands on a rag. "That's for people with money and no sense." "It's a full ride," I clarified quickly. "They're covering tuition, all of it. I'll work for housing. I'll figure it out. It's a chance. My chance." He laughed once, low and sharp. "A chance for what? To waste 4 years pretending you're better than the people who raised you." My throat tightened. "It's not about that. It's about what I can build, what I can learn. This is what I've worked for." He tossed the rag onto the truck's hood. "You think I care about those toys you build in the garage? That's not real work, Liv. That's daydreaming. MIT doesn't make people like us. It eats them alive." I felt something heavy slide down inside me, like a door slamming shut. "I can handle it," I said quietly. "I've handled everything else." For a second, he just stared at me, as if trying to find the child he once understood, but she was gone. Then he said, almost softly, "You go. You're on your own. You want to chase this fantasy? Fine. But don't expect this family to pick up the pieces when it falls apart." Behind him, the setting sun bathed the windows in gold, but his eyes remained hard, unblinking. I wanted to believe he didn't mean it, that he was just scared for me in his own way. But deep down, I knew this was final. Mom stood by the doorway, her hands clutching a dish towel, knuckles white. She said nothing, just watched us, her face pale with a mixture of fear and heartbreak. When I turned to her, she gave me that small, tremulous smile I'd known my whole life. "He doesn't mean it, Liv," she whispered. "You know how he gets." I nodded because it was easier than telling her that this time he did mean it. That night, I packed quietly. I didn't own much, 2 suitcases, a stack of notebooks, and the pocket watch. Sleep was an impossible luxury, so I sat at my desk, staring at the letter under the lamp. The words "congratulations" and "we look forward to your contributions" glowed faintly in the yellow light. I thought of the garage, the tiny red light on my first circuit board, the night I'd whispered I'd make time itself listen. Perhaps this was time's answer. In the early morning, I heard the creak of floorboards, Mom moving softly. Down the hallway. She knocked, then opened my door halfway, her eyes red. She held out a paper bag. "Sandwiches," she said, her voice shaking. "For the bus and an apple. You'll need to eat." I took it, managing a weak smile. "Thanks, Mom." She hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged me. It was quick, almost clumsy, but warm. As she pulled away, she whispered, "You have your grandfather's hands, you know. He would have been proud." Then she left before I could answer. When I stepped outside, the morning air was cold enough to sting. The bus stop was 2 blocks down. I dragged my suitcase through the frost, the wheels bumping over the cracks in the pavement. The neighborhood slept soundly, smoke curling from chimneys, a distant dog's bark punctuating the silence, the familiar smell of diesel in the air. As the bus rounded the corner, I glanced back at our house. Its windows were dark, save for one. The kitchen, where Mom stood behind the curtain, a shadow in the soft glow of the stove light. I raised my hand, even though I knew she couldn't see me clearly. Dad's truck remained in the driveway, engine off. He didn't come out. When the bus doors hissed open, I climbed aboard, settling by the window and pressing my forehead against the cool glass. The pocket watch ticked softly in my coat pocket, each beat steady and sure. For a long time, I watched our street recede into the gray horizon, the familiar shapes of home shrinking until they vanished. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. There was a profound freedom in the silence of that bus, in the way the world opened wide and endless beyond Nebraska's flat roads. I didn't know what awaited me in Boston, only that it was entirely mine. As the bus gained speed, I took the watch out, turning it over in my hands. Its face caught the weak morning light, the second hand ticking with perfect rhythm. "We're going," I whispered. "Let's make it count." Outside, the frost sparkled like metal. The highway stretched ahead, long and bright, carrying me toward a place where I wouldn't need anyone's permission to exist. Cambridge was nothing like Omaha. The city moved faster, spoke louder, and never ceased glowing. Even the air felt sharper, somehow charged with ambition. I rented a room in a crumbling 3-story house off Massachusetts Avenue, the kind with radiators that hissed all night and windows that never quite sealed. My room barely accommodated a twin bed and a folding desk, but it had a single window overlooking the street. From there, I could glimpse the faint red glow of the MIT dome, close enough to touch, a promise I had finally grasped. The scholarship covered tuition, but not living expenses. So, I snatched every job I could find, washing dishes at a cafe before sunrise, cleaning labs at night, fueled by coffee and sheer luck. The pocket watch remained in my coat pocket, a constant companion. When exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, I'd slip my hand inside, feel the slow, rhythmic tick, and remind myself of my purpose. If I can't make them proud, I'll make time itself listen. Days blurred into a relentless cycle. Lectures in the morning, problem sets in the afternoon, work until midnight. Some nights, I'd sleep in the robotics lab until dawn, curled beside half-assembled prototypes. The machines hum a shallow lullaby. My body was perpetually tired, my brain relentlessly alive. I constructed small robotic arms from scrap parts salvaged from the lab's discard bin, programmed microcontrollers on borrowed laptops, and dreamed of machines that moved with the precision, silence, and kindness of living things. MIT was a crucible of brilliance and arrogance. My classmates, scions of scientists and CEOs, spoke of innovation as their birthright. I mostly stayed quiet, absorbing everything. I had no pedigree. I had hunger. No funding. I had the stubbornness of someone who had incinerated every bridge behind her. By my second semester, the toll began to show. I skipped meals unintentionally, prioritizing lab hours over food. My hands trembled from too much caffeine and too little sleep. One night, around 3 a.m., as I soldered a circuit for a robot prototype, my vision blurred. The soldering iron slipped and the world tilted. The next thing I knew, I was on the cold floor, the clatter of metal echoing. When I opened my eyes, I was in the campus infirmary, a blanket draped over me, and force steadily dripping. A woman with auburn hair and a messy bun sat beside me, scrolling on her tablet. Noticing I was awake, she smiled. "So, you do have a pulse," she quipped. "That's good news." I blinked groggy. "Who are you?" "Grace," she said, offering her hand. "You scared half the lab last night. Found you on the floor, surrounded by wires and something that looked suspiciously like a dying toaster. You certainly know how to make an impression." I managed a weak laugh. "It's supposed to be a delivery unit." "Well," she rejoined, "it almost delivered you to the afterlife." From that day forward, Grace became my anchor. She was everything I wasn't. Loud, fearless, unfiltered. From Seattle, studying biomedical engineering, she always, impossibly, found time to cook. "You can't run on vending machine granola bars," she'd scold, appearing at my door with soup in a plastic container. Brains need fuel to live, not just ambition. I hadn't realized how deeply lonely I'd been until Grace's arrival. She never inquired about my family, and I never offered the story. We didn't need to. We communicated in blueprints and equations, in long nights at the lab, and quiet cups of coffee at the all-night diner. She called me the machine whisperer. I called her the storm. Together, we built, broke, and built again. I started carrying the pocket watch in my backpack, right next to my notebook. Its ticking filled the silence when I worked alone. Sometimes too weary to think, I'd place it beside my laptop, timing my progress to its rhythm. It whispered that precision could coexist with persistence, that moving forward didn't always mean rushing. The years both crawled and sprinted. Between coursework and jobs, one problem continuously drew my focus: how to create robots that genuinely help people, not just fascinated engineers. Hospitals use costly systems to transport medical supplies, but smaller clinics, especially in towns like the one my mother worked in, simply couldn't afford them. I remembered her returning from nursing shifts, sore-footed, a tired smile etched on her face, saying, "We're short-staffed again." That memory never faded. So I began sketching a compact transport robot, one that could navigate narrow hospital corridors, avoid obstacles, and deliver supplies swiftly, affordably, reliably. It wouldn't be beautiful, but it would be vital. The kind of invention that could genuinely ease lives. Grace found me hunched over the sketches one night. "You're building something," she observed. "I can tell by that look on your face." "Not yet," I corrected, tracing a line on the blueprint. "But I will. I want to make something that matters, something that moves the world." She teased, echoing words I hadn't spoken aloud in years. "Yeah, something like that." I smiled faintly. We poured countless nights into the lab. When we lacked parts, we scavenged from broken prototypes. When time ran short, we sacrificed sleep. Each time the robot faltered, we rebuilt it, laughing through frustration. Grace possessed a singular talent for making the impossible feel temporary. One night, after a long, finally successful test run, we sat on the floor, eating cold noodles straight from the container. The robot hummed past us, quietly carrying a tray from one end of the room to the other. "You realize," Grace said, You just built the thing you used to dream about. I watched its slow, steady movement and felt something rise in my chest, a feeling like pride, but softer, more profound. Not yet, I replied. This is just the start. I didn't tell her that I was already envisioning its future. Small-town hospitals, rural clinics, places forgotten by progress. Places like where my mother still worked, her hands cracked from winter, her heart too vast for the world she inhabited. I longed to send her something that would lighten that burden, even if she never knew its origin. By graduation, I possessed more than a degree. I had a prototype, a dream, and a solitary truth etched into my bones. Survival wasn't about escaping the past, but about transforming it. The day before commencement, I sat by the Charles River with Grace, watching the sunset paint the water. The pocket watch ticked softly in my hand. Grace nudged my shoulder. So, what's next for you, Bennett? I gazed at the horizon, where city lights began to shimmer, and replied, I think it's time to build something that doesn't need anyone's permission to exist. The wind off the water was cold, but I didn't feel it. For the first time, I wasn't running from home anymore. I was running towards something entirely my own. After graduation, Boston, despite giving me everything I needed to become myself, no longer felt big enough. It evoked too many memories of survival. Cold nights, fluorescent lights, and ramen dinners that tasted of sheer determination. Grace felt it too. One night, over coffee in a quiet diner near Kennel Square, she suggested, what if we stop building other people's dreams and start building ours? That's how Northline Robotics was conceived, a name chosen at 2 a.m. when the world felt boundless and ripe with possibility. We crammed our few belongings in her old hatchback, strapped the prototypes into the back seat with duct tape, and drove west until the skyline yielded to mountains. We chose Denver not for convenience, but because it was wild. It offered open skies, crisp air, and room to breathe, something Boston never truly had. We found an old auto garage on the city's fringe, renting it for next to nothing. The space was drafty, its walls lined with rusted tools and peeling paint. It smelled faintly of gasoline and rain-soaked concrete, but to us, it was perfect, a blank canvas. We scrubbed it clean, set up folding tables, strung extension cords, and claimed it as home. The early days were brutal. Denver winters could cleave bone deep, and the heater was a reluctant ally. We coded in gloves, our breath fogging as we huddled around laptops. Dinner was a monotonous rotation. Canned soup, reheated noodles, or the occasional pizza when a freelance gig materialized to keep the lights on. Nights blurred, code transforming into numbers, numbers into hours, hours into years. We built everything by hand. Frames, sensors, circuitry. Grace handled design. I handled mechanics and algorithms. Our first prototype, Northline 1, was small, clunky, and perpetually temperamental. Its navigation was shaky, its sensors unreliable, yet it possessed a pulse. We spent entire nights rewriting code and soldering joints until our fingers went numb. Every time we felt on the verge of breakthrough, something spectacularly failed. Motors overheated, software loops froze, batteries died in plumes of smoke. Money evaporated faster than courage. Investors smiled politely, then politely declined. They couldn't fathom why two women, devoid of corporate backing, believed they could contend with billion-dollar robotics firms. Too niche, they'd say. Rural healthcare doesn't scale. They were right about one thing. It didn't scale easily. But that wasn't the point. It wasn't about markets or profits. It was about meaning. I wanted to build something that mattered to people who were consistently unseen. By the second year, our accounts were threadbare. We owed back rent on the garage. Our equipment faltered, and even Grace, eternally optimistic, began to dim. One night, she slammed her laptop shut. Maybe they're right, Liv, she sighed. Maybe no one's waiting for this. I offered no reply. My gaze settled on the old pocket watch on the workbench beside me, still ticking, steady and patient as it always had. I heard my father's voice. MIT is for people with money and no sense. Then my mother's tired hands, her hospital shifts, her quiet strength. I looked at Grace. Someone is waiting, I affirmed. They just don't know it yet. The next morning, I wired every last dollar from my personal savings into the company account. Grace discovered it later, checking the books. She froze. "You put in everything?" she asked, her voice hushed. "Everything you had?" I nodded. "If we're going down, I'd rather do it building something real." She stared at me for a long time, then exhaled. "Okay," she said, a new fire in her eyes. "Then let's make it count." A month later, a hospital in rural Montana reached out. Their administrator, Dr. Patel, had stumbled upon a small blog post about our prototype and wanted to test it. "We can't afford the big commercial systems," she explained over the phone, "but we'll take anything that works." Grace and I packed Northline 1, swaddling in blankets, and loaded it into a rented van. The drive stretched 16 hours, through snow-covered plains and mountain passes. By the time we arrived, the sky was a tender lavender with dawn. The hospital was small. 2 floors, 20 rooms, a handful of nurses who looked more tired than paid. We spent 3 days installing sensors and mapping hallways. The staff watched with a curious skepticism, not expecting much. When the first trial run began, I held my breath. The robot whirred softly, gliding down the hall, turning at the first corner, and for once, it didn't crash. It carried a tray of lab samples from the nurses' station to the diagnostics wing without a single error. The nurses clapped, half in disbelief. By week's end, Northline 1 had completed over 200 deliveries. Supply turnaround times plummeted, costs were slashed, and nurses who once spent hours on errands now had precious time to sit with patients. Dr. Patel called us into her office on the final day. "You didn't just save us money," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. "You gave us time." On the drive back to Denver, neither Grace nor I spoke much. Snow fell in slow, mesmerizing sheets, catching in the headlights. Halfway through Wyoming, she turned to me. "We did it, didn't we?" I smiled faintly, my eyes still on the road. "Barely," I conceded, "but barely counts." The next morning, a local Montana newspaper ran a small story. "Engineer builds robots for rural healthcare." It wasn't a national headline, not front-page news, but it was something. The first time I saw my name in print, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, like a clock that had finally found its rhythm. The article spread quietly, first among medical forums, then local tech circles, then small-town hospitals desperate for affordable solutions. Emails began to arrive, slowly at first, then dozens at a time. "Can we test your model? Can we license your design? Can you teach us how it works?" Within 6 months, we had more orders than we could possibly manage. Grace wept when the first real check cleared. I didn't cry. I just stood in the middle of our cold garage, the robot humming softly beside me, and whispered, "They don't see me, but the world will." And it did. By year's end, Northline Robotics had expanded into a proper workspace. The walls were clean now, the lights bright, the floors warm. But I kept that old pocket watch on the shelf above my desk, still ticking away the hours. It reminded me that I hadn't escaped my past. I had transformed it into motion. Every tick was a small defiance against every voice that had told me I couldn't. Sometimes at night, when the lab quieted and Grace had gone home, I'd sit alone and listen to that sound, the faint, steady heartbeat of everything I'd built from the wreckage of what I'd left behind. And each click echoed the promise I made years ago in the cold of my father's garage. If I can't make them proud, I'll make time itself listen. Now, it was listening. So was the world. 3 years later, the world finally caught up to what we'd built. Northline Robotics had blossomed from a frigid garage into a formidable company. 30 employees, multiple hospital contracts, and a gleaming glass office downtown with our name etched on the door. I'd learned the language of investors, mastered staying awake through 18-hour days, even how to smile for cameras when sleep was a distant memory. Grace called it success. I called it survival with better lighting. When an email from Forbes arrived, I almost didn't open it. The subject line read, "Congratulations, you've been selected for the 30 under 30 in healthcare." I stared at it for a long time before clicking, half expecting it to be a mistake. It wasn't. They wanted to feature our work on robotic systems for rural hospitals. The very dream that had begun in a freezing Denver garage, now printed in a glossy magazine that once sat untouched on my father's coffee table. The ceremony was in San Francisco, all marble floors and glittering chandeliers. Cameras flashed, champagne flowed, and people introduced themselves with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. I wore a simple navy suit and a silver watch. The pocket watch was too old for such nights, but I kept it in my purse anyway, its faint tick grounding me. During the live interview, under the blinding stage lights, the reporter leaned forward, her smile bright. "Olivia Bennett," she said, "your company has helped hospitals across 5 states. That must feel incredible. Tell me, your family must be so proud, right?" The question landed harder than expected. It wasn't cruel, but casual, innocent even, yet it struck exactly where it hurt. The studio lights blurred for a second. I smiled, because that's what you do when honesty is too expensive. "They're probably busy," I said lightly. "We don't talk much about work." The interviewer laughed politely, moved to the next question, and the cameras continued to roll. I answered everything flawlessly, measured, articulate, unshakable. But inside, I felt something small and familiar hollowing out a space in my chest. That night, I returned to my hotel room, overlooking the bay. The city below glowed like circuitry, every light a heartbeat of a world that never slept. I kicked off my heels, placed the award plaque on the desk, and sat by the window with a glass of champagne I never touched. For a while, I just watched the fog roll in from the water, trying to let the evening's clamor dissipate. Out of habit, I reached for my phone. I scrolled through emails first. Congratulations from partners, messages from colleagues, a text from Grace that simply said, "We did it." Then, without intending to, I opened Instagram. The first photo that appeared stopped me cold. My father's account, one I hadn't looked at in years. The picture was simple, our old dining room in Omaha. My father, mother, and brother Cole gathered around the table. The same amber lighting, the same walls, the same china plates. Cole was laughing, his arms slung around Dad's shoulder. Mom's smile was small but warm. The caption read, "So proud of my boys." There was no empty chair in the picture, no hint that I had ever existed at that table. I stared until the screen blurred. The sound of the city outside grew distant, as if I were submerged underwater. I set the phone face down and let the silence engulf the room. The champagne on nightstand caught the light from the window, tiny bubbles rising in slow, lazy motion, untouched. I leaned back against the cool glass and closed my eyes. This was supposed to be the moment that made everything worthwhile. The recognition, the validation, the proof. Instead, it felt hollow, like a pause in an empty room. I had built everything I'd promised myself, everything they said I couldn't, and yet the people I'd once wanted most to see me had never even looked up. I reached for my purse and took out the pocket watch. It was still ticking, steady, unbothered. For years, that sound had signified hope, momentum, progress, defiance. Tonight, it simply sounded like time passing, indifferent to what I had built or lost. I placed it on a nightstand beside the champagne, the faint reflection of city lights glinting across its surface. Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the skyline until only the faint glow of streetlights remained. I whispered into the empty room, "They don't see me, but the world will." My new apartment sat high above downtown Denver, its walls almost entirely glass. From where I stood in the living room, the Rockies stretched across the horizon like a memory that refused to fade. The morning light spilled in softly, catching on the clean lines of the furniture, the pale oak floors, the quiet hum of a city awakening below. For the first time in years, I didn't hear machines, alarms, or hurried footsteps. Just air, just silence. When I moved in, I vowed not to fill the space with noise. No clutter, no chaos, no ghosts. The walls remained bare, save for 3 frames. My MIT diploma, the first Northline robotics blueprint, and a photo of the prototype that saved that Montana hospital. Between them, encased in glass, hung the pocket watch. It still ticked, its rhythm soft and steady, a reminder not of struggle anymore, but of arrival. The centerpiece of the apartment wasn't the view or the decor. It was the table. I'd commissioned it from a local craftsman who salvaged wood from abandoned barns in the mountains. A 12-foot length of reclaimed walnut with 12 identical chairs. No head, no end. Everyone equal. When it was delivered, the craftsman asked if I wanted to stain it darker, make it look more formal. No, I told him. Keep it scarce. It's the only honest thing in here. That table became the heart of my home. Not for show, not for meetings or media interviews, but for something quieter, solitude without loneliness. Some nights, I'd prepare a simple meal, soup and bread, and eat in the soft glow of the pendant light hanging above it. Other nights, I'd spread out sketches for new prototypes, tracing ideas across its worn surface until dawn. There was a profound peace in that routine, a rhythm I had never known in the house where I grew up. I used to believe success would sound like applause or recognition. Here, it sounded like the faint tick of the pocket watch and the whisper of wind against the glass. It was the kind of quiet you don't earn by running faster. It's the kind you reach when you finally stop. Sometimes, I catch myself staring at that table for long stretches, imagining it full. People talking, laughing, no one trying to prove their worth, no one sitting higher or lower than anyone else. Perhaps that was the real dream all along. Not robots, or headlines, or companies, but a seat at a table where everyone belonged. There are no family photos anywhere, not out of bitterness, but out of truth. They didn't belong here. This space wasn't built on nostalgia. It was built on reclamation. I had spent too many years trying to make something out of absence, too many nights craving someone else's approval to complete me. Now, the absence was part of the design. Every inch of quiet, every empty chair was exactly where it should be. When guests visited, colleagues, new friends, the occasional journalist, they always commented on the view. It must feel amazing to live up here, one of them once remarked. I smiled. It feels quiet, I replied. That's enough. At night, Denver glittered below like a field of stars fallen to earth. I'd turn off the lights, let the city's glow fill the room, and listen to the watch ticking softly on the wall. For years, that sound had measured survival, counting the seconds between exhaustion and hope. Now it was the sound of stillness, of time that no longer needed to be outrun. Sometimes, when I caught the reflection of the mountains in the glass, I'd recall that old dining room in Omaha. The rigid table, my father's booming voice, the laughter that cut sharper than words. The contrast was surreal. There, I had learned to stay small. Here, I had learned to occupy space without apology. I didn't build luxury. I built peace. And for the first time, it was enough. The message arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, the kind of day when Denver felt more like sky than city. 6 p.m., Thursday. Mom misses you. Just that. No emojis. No pretense of small talk. 7 words that landed heavier than they should have. I must have read it a dozen times, the cursor blinking on the screen like a heartbeat. It had been years since I'd returned to Nebraska, years since I'd stepped inside that house with its amber light and walls that seemed to hold a grudge. I promised myself I wouldn't go back unless I truly wanted to. And I wasn't sure if this counted as wanting. But Mom misses you was enough. It always had been. So, Thursday morning, I packed a small bag, grabbed my coat, and started driving east. The miles blurred by in slow stretches of highway and empty plains, the mountains fading behind me like a memory I wasn't ready to relinquish. The pocket watch sat on the dashboard, its steady tick filling the silence between the radio and the wind. By the time I reached Omaha, dusk had settled over the streets, washing everything in the kind of pale orange that made even the ordinary look forgiving. Their house looked smaller now, as if time had pressed down on it. The shutters were still green, the porch light still flickered. For a moment, I just sat in the car, engine running, hands gripping the steering wheel. Then I turned it off, pocketed the watch, and walked to the door. Mom opened it before I could knock. "Liv," she said softly, her voice the same one that used to wake me for school. Her smile trembled, caught between guilt and relief. "You made it." I did. I tried to smile back. The warmth hit me first. The smell of turkey, cinnamon, and something faintly metallic like memory. The dining room was exactly as I remembered. Too much light, too little breathing room. My father sat at the head of the table. Same spot, same posture, older but unchanged. His hair had thinned, his shoulders stooped slightly, but his presence still filled the room like static. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face before he masked it with a tight smile. "Well," he said, "didn't think you'd actually come." "I almost didn't," I countered, matching his tone. Cole was there too, sitting beside his wife, a broad grin on his face. "Liv, you wouldn't believe it. We just finished remodeling the house. Built it ourselves. For bedrooms, garage big enough for both cars. Dad says it's the pride of the Bennetts." Of course he did. I smiled politely, letting him talk. He filled the air with stories about Little League and mortgage rates, the safe kind of talk that kept everything else buried. I nodded in the right places, laughed when expected. Mom busied herself at the counter, her movements careful, as if one wrong sound might shatter the fragile peace. The conversation stayed light for most of dinner, but it was the kind of light that flickers before it burns out. Every word was layered with the things none of us were saying. My father inquired about my company in the same tone someone might ask about hobby. My mother asked if I was eating enough. Cole offered to set me up with one of his friends who liked smart women. It was after the second bottle of wine that the air shifted. My father leaned back in his chair, swirling the glass, his cheeks flushed, his eyes gleaming with the kind of nostalgia that usually precedes cruelty. He raised his glass, his voice booming like old times. "You know," he said, "not everyone at this table deserves to be here." The words hung there for a beat, heavy and familiar. Then the laughter came, soft at first, then louder, rolling across the table like an echo from another lifetime. Cole laughed, because that's what he'd always done. His wife joined in. Even Mom offered a nervous, automatic smile, the kind that pleaded, "Please, let's not make this worse." All eyes swiveled to me. The clock on the wall ticked once. I set my wine glass down carefully, deliberately, as if the act itself possessed profound meaning. I looked at him, not angry, not wounded, just clear. "Good thing I built a life that doesn't need your approval," I stated, my voice calm, steady, unshakable. "Don't worry, you'll read about it soon." The laughter stopped instantly. The room went still, as if someone had siphoned all the air. My mother froze, napkin still in hand, her eyes darting between us. Cole cleared his throat, muttered something about dessert, but no one moved. My father's face hardened. He didn't speak, but his grip on the glass tightened until his knuckles went white. I rose slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood. "Thanks for dinner, Mom," I said softly. The food was good. She opened her mouth, perhaps to apologize, but nothing came. I walked toward the door, the sound of my heels echoing through the silence. At the threshold, I turned once, just enough to see them frozen around the table. My brother looking down, my mother still clutching the napkin, my father's fork suspended midair, his mouth half open, like a man about to defend something he no longer believed. Outside, the night was crisp and cold. The porch light flickered once, twice. I stood there for a moment, inhaling the quiet, the kind of quiet that used to wound but now felt like freedom. Then I walked to my car, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. In the rearview mirror, I watched the house shrink behind me, its windows glowing softly against the dark. Somewhere inside, dinner would resume. The laughter would return, the same lines repeated, the same comfort built on silence. But not for me. For the first time, I wasn't leaving in anger. I was leaving because I finally understood I didn't need to earn my place at that table. I'd already built my own. A month later, snow had settled over Denver like a soft white hush. The city lights shimmered beneath it, quiet and reverent, as though even the streets understood the season. I hadn't planned anything for Christmas. For years, the holiday had meant empty rooms, unanswered calls, and a calendar full of work to fill the silence. But this year felt different. Perhaps it was the dinner in Omaha, the look on my mother's face, or perhaps it was the realization that some wounds only stop bleeding when you cease waiting for someone else to heal them. Whatever it was, one morning in early December, I called Grace. "What if," I ventured, "we hosted dinner?" She laughed. "A company dinner?" "No," I clarified. Something real. Something for people who never get invited to the fancy ones. 2 weeks later, the conference hall at Northline's headquarters was transformed. We cleared out the machinery, brought in long wooden tables, strung golden fairy lights from the rafters, and filled the air with the scent of cinnamon and roasted apples. We hired local chefs, rented buses to transport hospital staff and families who couldn't afford the trip, and infused the space with a warmth that no amount of money could replicate. The guest list wasn't curated or elegant. It was human. Nurses from rural hospitals are robot-supported, patients recovering from long-term illnesses, a handful of single parents juggling medical bills, and a dozen children still fighting their way back from hospital beds. No media, no sponsors, just people who deserved a night where the world felt kind again. When the doors opened that evening, the cold air rushed in, mingled with laughter. Children scampered towards tables adorned with pine cones and silver ribbons. Nurses, still in their scrubs, shyly accepted mugs of cider. Music drifted through the air, soft jazz, just enough to enliven the room, never loud enough to drown out conversation. I moved quietly between the tables, ensuring everyone had what they needed. Grace, dressed as Mrs. Claus, distributed wrapped scarves and gloves to anyone who approached. A local bakery had donated gingerbread cookies shaped like gears. Her idea, not mine, and they vanished instantly. Halfway through dinner, one of the older nurses, a woman named Karen, caught my hand. "You didn't have to do this," she said, her eyes glistening. "I know," I replied softly. "That's why it matters." The food was simple but perfect. Roasted turkey, sweet potatoes, apple pie, warm enough to thaw the coldest heart. Laughter grew louder as the night progressed, weaving through the music and the clinking of cutlery. It was the sound of belonging, raw and unpolished. I was pouring cider for one of the kids when I noticed a man with a camera at the door. Then two more, local reporters drawn by word of mouth. I hadn't invited them, but I didn't turn them away. Some stories don't need hiding. One, a young woman with a notepad and an earnest smile, approached gently. "Miss Bennett," she began, "we heard you organized this whole thing yourself. Would you mind telling us why?" I glanced around the room, at the nurses laughing with their patients, at the children tearing open presents wrapped in bright red paper, at Grace, feigning shock every time someone thanked her. Then I smiled. "Because everyone deserves a seat at a table," I said, "especially those who are told they don't." She nodded slowly. "That's beautiful." I shrugged. "It's just the truth." She left soon after, but not before her photographer captured a few pictures of me sitting beside one of the children, a little girl in a wool hat too big for her head, her foreport tucked beneath her sleeve. Her name was Lily. She was 8 years old, recovering from leukemia. She told me she wanted to be an engineer someday. "Like Iron Man," she whispered, grinning through missing teeth. We talked for nearly an hour. She asked endless questions about the robots, how they moved, what they could do. I showed her sketches on my phone, and she drew her own version on a napkin, a lopsided little machine with a smiley face on its screen. When I told her it was perfect, she giggled, that bright, clear sound only children seem to carry. Later, as the night wound down, she looked up at me with wide, serious eyes and asked, "Do you have a family?" The question landed softly but deep. For a moment, I didn't know how to answer. The truth was complicated, heavy, but she wasn't asking for a confession, just honesty. So I smiled. "Tonight I do." She nodded, as if that made perfect sense. When the last guest departed and the music faded, the room was a beautiful kind of chaos. Crumbs on plates, ribbons scattered on the floor, the faint scent of cinnamon still clinging to the air. I stood there for a long moment, taking it all in. The laughter still echoed faintly in my ears, a sound so full it almost hurt. Grace came up beside me, her cheeks flushed, her hair escaping from the Santa hat. "You realize this is going to be all over the news tomorrow," she said. "Let them write what they want," I replied, smiling. "It's not about that." But the next morning, the photo was everywhere, on local news sites and healthcare journals, even shared on social media by hospital workers across the country. It showed me sitting with Lily, both of us laughing over her napkin drawing. The headline read, "Engineer hosts Christmas dinner for patients and nurses, says everyone deserves a seat at the table." My inbox filled with messages. My phone buzzed with calls. But what I remembered most wasn't the noise. It was the feeling. The warmth of that room, the smell of cinnamon, the laughter that didn't come at my expense. That night, I walked into my apartment, the golden city lights glimmering against the snow, and set the pocket watch on the table. It ticked softly, filling the space like a heartbeat. For years, that sound had marked time passing without meaning. Now it sounded like grace. And for the first time, I realized something simple, something I'd spent years chasing without knowing why. I didn't need to be proud of where I came from. I just needed to be at peace with where I'd arrived. The next morning, the world outside was still blanketed in snow, soft and bright under the Denver sun. The apartment was quiet, save for the faint hum of the heater and the steady ticking of the pocket watch on the table. I was making coffee when my phone began to ring. The number was familiar, but unexpected. Home. For a second, I almost didn't answer. Then I did. "Liv." My mother's voice was small, breathless, as if she'd been holding it in for years. "It's everywhere. The news, the papers, your photo, the dinner, the little girl. Your father saw it first thing this morning." He didn't say anything. He just left the paper open on the table. I closed my eyes and leaned against the counter, the warmth of the mug grounding me. "It's okay, Mom," I said quietly. "I didn't need you to see that I'm good. I just wanted you to know I'm okay." She was silent for a moment. Then I heard the sound of her crying softly on the other end, the way she used to when she thought no one was listening. "He was wrong," she whispered. "And I was too." I told myself staying quiet would keep the peace, but silence never protected anyone. I see that now. I swallowed the ache in my throat, staring out the window where snow still drifted down like ash. "I know, Mom," I said gently. "You don't have to explain." "I should have stood up for you," she said, her voice breaking. "I should have told him to stop, that you didn't need to be like him. Or your brother to make us proud. I thought I was keeping the family together, but all I did was lose you." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were harsh, but because they were honest, the kind of honesty that comes too late and still matters anyway. "You didn't lose me," I said softly. "I just had to go build something else before I could come back." She laughed through her tears, a shaky, fragile sound. "Your father." She paused, searching for the words. "He didn't say anything, but when he read the article headline, 'She built a table for those who had none.' He just sat there for a long time. Then he folded the paper and walked out to the porch. I pictured it instantly. The old kitchen bathed in morning light, the newspaper spread across the wooden table. The same table where those words had once been spoken. Not everyone at this table deserves to be here. And now, years later, another table, another story, printed for the world to see. "Maybe he's thinking," I said. "That's a start." "Do you think he'll call?" she asked. I smiled faintly. "I don't need him to." She was quiet again, the kind of quiet that felt like a breath after a storm. "It's Christmas soon," she said finally. "If you want, you don't have to, but Mom," I interrupted gently. "Every Christmas gives us another chance to start again. Maybe this one's yours." I heard her inhale sharply, then exhale in relief, like a weight she'd been carrying had finally slipped off her shoulders. "I love you, Liv." "I know," I said, and meant it. "I love you too." When the call ended, I stood there for a long time, the phone still in my hand, the apartment wrapped in the hush that follows forgiveness. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, and sunlight streamed through the window, scattering across the long wooden table. On it sat the folded newspaper, the Denver Post, its front page still visible. "Engineer builds a table for those who had none." Beside it lay the pocket watch, its face reflecting the light, its steady tick echoing softly through the room. I sat down, running my fingers along the worn wood grain of the table, tracing its imperfections. Every mark told a story. The late nights, the loneliness, the building and rebuilding of a life that no longer needed permission to exist. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel angry or small or unseen. Just peaceful, whole. In the quiet, the watch kept ticking, unbothered by the world's noise. Its rhythm filled the space like a heartbeat, patient and alive. I smiled to myself, looking out over the snowy Denver skyline, the mountains standing tall in the distance, strong, steady, and forgiving. Time, I thought, doesn't heal by erasing. It heals by keeping rhythm until you're ready to dance again. And as the city shimmered below, I whispered into the stillness, "Merry Christmas, Mom." The watch ticked once more. Steady. Sure. The sound of life moving forward. One beat at a time. If anyone ever told you that you don't belong at their table, build your own. Make it wider. Fill it with the ones who are left standing in the cold. The ones who are told to wait their turn, to stay quiet, to be smaller. Because true belonging isn't given. It's built one courageous tick at a time.